Back on the campaign trail for France's two remaining presidential candidates as the battle lines are drawn up over Europe. Violent clashes in Venezuela claim more lives as anti-Maduro protesters reject the president's offer of local elections. And the UN's World Food Programme launches a €1.1 billion operation to help victims of Yemen's two-year-long civil war. Hello, good to have you with us tonight here on France 24. I'm Belle Lupton. The first round behind them, and France's two presidential candidates are turning their attention to the second round of voting. With just under 2 weeks to go, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen will both be trying to persuade people who chose one of the other 9 candidates last Sunday to vote for them in May. Independent centrist Macron topped the first round with just over 24%. Far-right Marine Le Pen won 21.3%. President Hollande has made his endorsement in that second round clear.
In the face of such a risk, it is not possible to keep quiet. There is no benefit in taking refuge in indifference. Mobilization is essential. And for me, it is a clear choice. I will vote for Emmanuel Macron.
Well, neither Emmanuel Macron nor Marine Le Pen is from a traditional left or right political party. They've shaken up the status quo, but what do they stand for? Ellen Gainsford takes a look at their programmes.
They're both anti-establishment candidates, running without the backing of traditional parties. But that's where the similarities end. Macron, the maverick centrist, is left-wing on social issues, but economically liberal and pro-business. He's pledging to lower corporation tax and allow companies to renegotiate the 35-hour working week. He aims to cut unemployment from 9.7% down to 7%. And he's a keen supporter of the euro and the EU. In stark contrast to Marine Le Pen's protectionist policy pledges. Le Pen campaigned on a nationalist platform. She plans to give public contracts to French firms, tax companies that hire foreign workers, and add taxes to imports. She promises to give priority to French citizens for housing, jobs, and welfare. A Eurosceptic, Le Pen wants to renegotiate France's membership of the EU, followed by a referendum. Macron's new political party, En Marche, has never run MPs before, and Le Pen's National Front currently only has 2 lawmakers sitting in Parliament. Whoever wins, it will be the parliamentary elections in June that determine how they're able to govern. France will need a new form of coalition politics.
Well, earlier we spoke to Daphne Halikiopoulou, Associate Professor of Comparative Politics at the University of Reading in the UK. We asked her how important immigration would be as an issue in this second round.
Immigration is the core part of the agenda, but it's immigration as a security issue rather than immigration as a race issue. And this is, in fact, what many far-right parties are doing across Europe. And in a way, this is why they're more frightening, they're more scary, because they are able to permeate the mainstream in a way that, their sort of predecessors that were clearly racist, blatantly racist, couldn't do so. They are trying to broaden their electoral base to even take votes from the middle class. And in order to do that, they have to appear to be legitimate in the eyes of the voters. Now, that does not mean that they are not far-right. They are far-right parties. They are just playing the nationalism card in a different way.
Leaving France now, a woman who was injured during pro-government protests in Caracas has died, making her the latest victim of a month of protests in Venezuela. President Maduro says he's willing to hold a snap local election, but protesters calling for his resignation want a vote on the presidency.
Another victim in the Venezuelan protest crisis. The death toll has now reached at least 21 people as demonstrations for and against President Nicolás Maduro continue to divide the nation. Once again, protesters were met with violence by the police, who are struggling for control as the situation deteriorates.
Ellos llegaron They arrived without mercy. They arrived shooting, coming out as if we were delinquents. I was hit here, in my leg, on my back, and they shot my backside. And there are many people that were hit. They fell. The police can't restrain themselves. They burned our flags.
On Sunday, Maduro announced he would be willing to hold local elections immediately, but protests continued as the opposition maintained calls for him to step down from power and hold instant presidential elections, which are scheduled for next year. After 4 weeks of anti-government protests, Venezuela was again brought to a standstill as protesters barricaded roads and held sit-ins around the country. The unrest started March 29th when the Maduro-backed Supreme Court stripped the National Assembly of its powers, a move which many described as a step towards dictatorship.
I'm sitting here protesting the dictatorship that we have because we want freedom, because we want a future for our children so that more families are not divided, separated, and that Venezuela will return to being the same as before.
Venezuela's economic recession has pushed the country to the brink of starvation. Maduro has consistently blamed the United States of leading a coup d'etat against him, but has now isolated himself politically from the rest of Latin America as he is blamed for the crisis.
Well, Anatoly Kurmanev has been following those protests for us in Caracas. He sent this update earlier.
Maduro has hinted that he will allow elections for state government, which he himself postponed last year. This is something he had never had to do in his 4 years in government, very authoritarian style. And he still remains in control of most institutions, but there are signs of pressure on him is building within the government, within the armed forces. Not everyone wants to go down with him, if his ship crumbles. So that is the goal of the opposition, to just keep with people on the street long enough to make key judges, key officers in the armed forces to doubt whether it's in their best interest to stick with Maduro.
2.5 million people, most at risk of starvation in Yemen, will soon be receiving food aid after the World Food Programme has launched a new emergency operation. The €1.1 billion programme will also give food rations to another 4.2 million people who are struggling to feed themselves. Yemen has been embroiled in a civil war for 2 years, and the UN says millions have lost their homes and their source of income.
Yemen is a country that's on the brink of famine. We're seeing millions of people, almost 2/3 of the country are food insecure, which means they don't have enough food to survive. Almost 7 million people, it's basically the combined populations of Chicago and Los Angeles, don't know where their next meal is coming from and rely entirely upon external food assistance, external support for their survival. So the WFP is working in Yemen to avert a famine, to prevent large-scale starvation.
The US Defense Secretary has been in Afghanistan for a surprise visit. Jim Mattis was there just hours after his Afghan counterpart resigned over the deadliest Taliban attack ever on a military base last week that killed more than 140 soldiers. Mattis said he's under no illusions about the challenges associated with the US mission in Afghanistan.
2017 is going to be another tough year for the valiant Afghan security forces and the international troops who have stood and will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Afghanistan against terrorism. If the Taliban wish to join the political process and work honestly for a positive future for the Afghan people who have suffered long and hard, they need only to renounce violence and reject terrorism. It's a pretty low standard to join the political process.
And the US president has criticised the UN to visiting officials from that very organisation, saying it's failing in its handling of Syria and North Korea and calling for big reforms. But Donald Trump did say he sees fantastic potential in the UN. He was speaking at a lunch with ambassadors from the 15 Security Council countries.
The status quo in North Korea is also unacceptable, and the Council must be prepared to impose additional and stronger sanctions on North Korean nuclear and ballistic missile programs. This is a real threat to the world, whether we want to talk about it or not. North Korea is a big world problem, and it's a problem we have to finally solve.
Thousands of Australians and New Zealanders have braved the elements to take part in Anzac Day celebrations. Ceremonies are held annually to remember the ill-fated 1915 landing of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps in modern-day Turkey during World War I. More than 10,000 soldiers died in that failed campaign, and Gallipoli has become a symbol since then of courage for those two countries. Well, those marking the occasion today also acknowledge the contributions of troops currently serving in wars around the world. We'll leave you with those images at the end of this bulletin. We'll be back in 15 minutes.